Ethan Miller had spent most of his life feeling like he was running in place. No matter how hard he worked, nothing seemed to move forward. He grew up in an environment where struggle was normal and ambition was considered risky. People around him didn't talk about dreams. They talked about survival. Over time, Ethan learned to think the same way. He believed that aiming too high only led to disappointment, so he trained himself to expect very little. As the years passed, that belief quietly shaped his identity. He chose the safest options, even when they made him unhappy. He accepted routines that drained him because they felt familiar. Every morning, he woke up already tired, not from physical exhaustion, but from the weight of repetition. His life felt predictable, and deep down, that predictability scared him, but it also felt easier than change. Whenever Ethan considered doing something different, his mind immediately filled with reasons to stop. He told himself he wasn't smart enough, confident enough, or lucky enough. He compared himself to others and always found himself lacking. Instead of feeling inspired by their success, he felt confirmed in his failure. Their achievements became proof that success was reserved for people unlike him. Mistakes, no matter how small, stayed with him for a long time. He replayed them in his head, using them as reminders of why he shouldn't try again. He didn't see failure as a step forward. He saw it as a final judgment on his abilities. So he avoided situations where he might fail. Slowly, his world became smaller, built around comfort rather than potential. Ethan often told himself that circumstances were to blame. He blamed his upbringing, his finances, and the lack of opportunities around him. These explanations made sense and gave him temporary relief. If the problem was outside of him, then he didn't have to face it. But that relief came at a cost. Each excuse took a little more control away from his future. Late at night, when everything was quiet, his thoughts became louder. He thought about the person he might have become if fear hadn't guided so many of his choices. He remembered moments when he felt a spark of excitement about an idea, only to shut it down before it had a chance to grow. He convinced himself he was being realistic. But in those quiet moments, he knew the truth. He was protecting himself from disappointment by refusing to believe in change. One evening, after a particularly draining day, Ethan sat alone with nothing to distract him. No phone, no noise, no one else to blame. The silence forced him to confront a question he had avoided for years. What if nothing changes because he doesn't change? The thought made him uncomfortable. It challenged the story he had been telling himself about his limitations. For the first time, he noticed how often his own thoughts held him back. He realized that before life ever said no to him, he had already said no to himself. That realization didn't feel empowering at first. It felt heavy, but it also felt honest. He understood that his mindset had become a habit, and like any habit, it could either build him or break him. That night didn't magically fix his problems. His job was still the same. His situation hadn't changed, but something inside him shifted. He became aware that his thinking was not a fact, but a pattern, and patterns could be broken. In that moment of awareness, Ethan didn't find confidence or courage. What he found was responsibility. He realized that his future was not blocked by his past, but by the beliefs he carried forward. And for the first time in a long time, the idea that change was possible didn't feel foolish. It felt necessary. Change did not arrive in Ethan's life as a sudden burst of motivation. It entered quietly, almost unnoticed, through small choices that seemed insignificant at first. After the realization that his mindset had been holding him back, he became more aware of his thoughts. He noticed how quickly negativity appeared and how naturally doubt followed every idea. Instead of fighting those thoughts, he began observing them, questioning where they came from and whether they were actually true. Ethan started by changing the way he spoke to himself. The harsh inner voice that once dominated his thinking no longer went unchallenged. When he caught himself saying he wasn't capable, he paused and replaced that thought with something more honest. He didn't tell himself he was great or unstoppable. He told himself he was learning. That simple shift reduced the pressure he had always placed on himself. He began setting small goals, not because they guaranteed success, but because they were manageable. He focused on consistency rather than perfection. Some days he showed up with energy, other days he showed up with doubt, but he showed up anyway. That alone was new. For the first time, progress mattered more than comfort. Failure still happened. Mistakes didn't disappear. But the meaning of failure changed. Instead of seeing it as proof that he should stop, Ethan started treating it like feedback. Each setback showed him what didn't work and what needed improvement. Slowly, his fear of failure weakened. It no longer controlled his decisions. Ethan also changed what he allowed into his mind. He became selective about the content he consumed and the conversations he engaged in. He paid attention to stories of people who had once struggled, not because they were perfect, but because they were persistent. Those stories reminded him that growth was possible, even when the starting point was difficult. As his mindset shifted, his behavior followed. He spoke up more, even when his voice shook. He tried things he once avoided. He stopped waiting for the perfect moment and started working with what he had. These actions didn't transform his life overnight, but they changed how he saw himself. Confidence no longer felt like something he needed to find. It became something he built through action. There were moments when old habits tried to return. On difficult days, doubt whispered that he was wasting his time. The difference now was that Ethan didn't obey those thoughts. He acknowledged them and moved forward anyway. He understood that growth was uncomfortable by nature and that discomfort was not a sign of failure. Over time, he noticed a quiet strength developing within him. He trusted himself more, not because everything worked out, but because he knew he could handle whatever didn't. His focus shifted from outcomes to effort. Instead of asking whether he would succeed, he asked whether he was improving. Ethan realized that mindset was not a single decision, but a daily practice. Each day offered him the choice to return to old patterns or continue building new ones. Some days were easier than others, but each day reinforced the same truth. Change was happening, not in dramatic moments, but in consistent effort. By choosing responsibility over excuses and growth over fear, Ethan entered a new stage of his journey. He wasn't where he wanted to be yet, but he was no longer stuck. His mindset was evolving, and with it, his sense of possibility. The changes in Ethan's life became noticeable not because everything suddenly worked, but because he responded differently when things didn't. Challenges still appeared. Setbacks still tested him, and uncertainty remained part of his journey. What had changed was his relationship with those moments. He no longer saw them as signs to stop. He saw them as part of the process he had chosen to commit to. Over time, the discipline he practiced quietly began to shape his identity. He no longer depended on motivation to take action. He understood that motivation came and went, but habits stayed. On days when enthusiasm was high, he worked with intensity. On days when doubt returned, he relied on routine. That consistency built a level of self-trust he had never experienced before. Ethan started to notice opportunities he would have ignored in the past. Conversations, ideas, and possibilities stood out to him because his mind was no longer closed by fear. He didn't wait to feel ready. He acted while learning considered readiness. Each action strengthened his belief that growth was something he could control through effort. Failure still visited him, sometimes unexpectedly. Plans didn't always succeed. Some risks led to disappointment, but instead of breaking him, those experiences refined him. He reflected, adjusted, and moved forward with greater clarity. The pain of failure no longer felt permanent. It felt temporary and useful. As his mindset matured, Ethan stopped comparing his journey to others. He understood that comparison had once drained his confidence and distorted his progress. Now, he measured success by his own growth. He focused on becoming better than he was yesterday, not better than someone else today. This shift gave him peace and direction. His confidence was no longer loud or forced. It was calm and grounded. It came from knowing he would not quit on himself. He trusted his ability to adapt, learn, and persist. Even in uncertainty, he felt stable. That inner stability changed how he carried himself and how others responded to him. The future, once a source of anxiety, became something he actively shaped. Instead of fearing what might go wrong, Ethan focused on what he could build. He made decisions with intention, aware that small actions repeated over time created powerful results. His mindset no longer asked for guarantees. It committed to effort regardless of outcome. Ethan's life did not become perfect, but it became purposeful. He accepted that growth required patience and discomfort. He stopped searching for shortcuts and embraced the long process. Each step forward reinforced the belief that he was capable of change, not because circumstances allowed it, but because he chose it. In time, others noticed the difference, not because Ethan spoke about transformation, but because he lived it. His actions reflected clarity, resilience, and responsibility. He became proof that the future is not something waiting in the distance, but something shaped daily by thought and action. Ethan understood a truth that reshaped everything. The moment he changed his mindset, his direction changed. When his direction changed, his future followed. His journey was no longer about escaping the past, but about creating what came next. And in that understanding, he found not just success, but meaning.